not stupid because you say that.
Lower your voice. That he just can't pick up on when it's appropriate to get into these deep conversations.
I need you to understand I trust you. I don't trust the other person. And
I need a break.
Marissa and Edward were supposed to be celebrating how much better their relationship had become. Instead, one dinner exposed the exact reason I think these two may have a much bigger problem than jealousy. Because Edward did not walk into that restaurant angry. Marissa was not already threatening to leave. They were flirting, complimenting each other, and clearly still attracted to each other. Marissa wanted one easy night where they could stop dissecting the relationship and simply enjoy being together. Edward seemed happy too. Then the mood completely changed. Marissa asked for emotional space. Edward wanted reassurance. And the harder he tried to get that reassurance, the less emotionally available Marissa became. That is the part one think matters. This was not really a fight about cheating. It was not about a napkin. It was not even about whether Edward chose the wrong time for a serious conversation. It exposed a cycle. When Edward feels insecure, he moves toward Marissa and wants answers immediately. When Marissa feels overwhelmed, she moves away and wants the conversation to stop. Her distance makes Edward more anxious. His anxiety makes Marissa feel even more pressured. And suddenly both people are doing the exact thing that makes the other person feel less safe. That is much harder to fix than one argument. Because the physical chemistry between Marissa and Edward is obvious. The bigger question is whether that chemistry has been distracting them from something neither one wants to admit. Being attracted to somebody answers, "Do I want you?" Marriage asks, "Can I actually live with you?" And after watching this dinner, I am not convinced they have answered that second question. What makes the argument especially interesting is that Marissa actually tells Edward what she needs before things fall apart. She says she has had a difficult week. She wants to relax. She wants to have fun. She does not want another emotionally exhausting relationship conversation that night. Notice what she does not say. She does not tell Edward they can never talk about his concerns. She does not say his feelings are stupid. She does not say there will never be another conversation about trust. She is basically saying, not tonight. That sounds like a reasonable boundary. But Edward clearly has something sitting heavily on his mind, and he does not seem comfortable leaving the issue unresolved. So instead of letting the night stay light, he starts talking about betrayal and what would happen if Marissa ever stepped outside the relationship. His message is basically this. If Marissa cheats on him, she is the one losing something valuable. And on paper, that sounds confident. It sounds like Edward is saying, I know my worth. I am not begging somebody to choose me. If you throw away this relationship, that is your decision. I actually agree with the basic idea. The problem is that Edward does not behave like someone who is completely at peace with that idea. That contradiction is where this gets interesting. Because if you truly believe another person's betrayal would simply be their loss, you normally do not need to keep bringing the possibility into conversations where nothing has even happened. You know your boundary. You know what you would do. You do not need to repeatedly rehearse the pain before it arrives. Edward's words sound confident. His behavior still looks worried. And before people immediately attack him for that, I think we have to acknowledge something important. Edward has reasons to feel uncertain. He moved into Marissa's life, not the other way around. Her household was already established. Her children were already there. Her routines were established. Her family relationships were established. Her friends were established. Her career and lifestyle existed long before Edward entered the picture. And most importantly, the woman he is supposed to marry has already struggled openly with whether she wants to go through with marriage at all. Put yourself in his position for a second. If your partner repeatedly questions whether marrying you is the right decision, eventually you are going to start looking for reassurance. You are going to pay attention to every change in tone, every moment of distance, every relationship with an ex, every hesitation, every sign that maybe you are more committed than the other person. So Edward wanting reassurance does not automatically make him unreasonable. Where he loses me is what happens after Marissa tells him she cannot give him that reassurance right then. There is a difference between saying, your concern does not matter, and saying, I cannot have this conversation tonight. Those are not the same message. And I think Edward hears them as if they are. That is where his need for reassurance starts turning into pressure. Because yes, your feelings deserve to be discussed in a relationship. But your partner does not have to become emotionally available on command every time you feel anxious. Sometimes a healthy conversation requires waiting, not avoiding, waiting. There is a huge difference. If Edward had said, I understand you are exhausted. This is still bothering me. So can we talk tomorrow? The entire situation could have looked different. Instead, Marissa asks for relief and Edward keeps pushing toward resolution. At that point, he is not really listening to what she is saying anymore. He is listening for the answer that will make him feel safe. And that is exactly when Marissa starts getting colder. But this is where the conversation becomes uncomfortable for Marissa too, because her response exposes another pattern that many viewers have already noticed. Marissa says she wants Edward to function like an adult partner. But sometimes she communicates with him like she is managing him. The dinner etiquette moment might seem tiny.
It is just a napkin.
But the napkin itself is not the point. The pattern around it is. She is correcting him, showing him how things should be done, explaining what is appropriate. And then, during the same dinner, she is also deciding what type of conversation is appropriate and when it should happen. Now, to be fair, Marissa has every right to have standards. She has children. She has an established household. Edward entered a life that already had structure. Expecting somebody joining your home to respect that structure is not automatically controlling. But there is a difference between saying, here is how we can make this household work together, and constantly communicating, here is how you need to behave in my world. That distinction matters. Because Edward is not supposed to be another project Marissa has to improve. He is supposed to become her husband. And you cannot repeatedly place yourself in the teacher position and then be shocked when your relationship starts feeling like teacher and student. That is why I think the parent-child criticism from some viewers has gotten louder. It is not because of one dinner. It is because people are seeing a larger power dynamic. Marissa has the home. Marissa has the established social circle. Marissa has the family system. Marissa has the career. Marissa has the lifestyle Edward is adapting to. And ultimately, Marissa is also the person still deciding whether this marriage is something she wants. That gives her enormous structural power. But here is what makes their relationship more complicated than simply saying Marissa controls everything. Edward has power too. His power comes through emotional urgency. When Edward feels something, he seems to want the issue handled now. When he is insecure, the entire emotional temperature of the relationship can shift until he feels reassured. So both people may actually feel controlled by the other. Edward may feel like Marissa controls the environment, the rules, the lifestyle, the social expectations, and the future. Marissa may feel like Edward controls the emotional atmosphere. She can walk into dinner wanting peace, but if Edward feels insecure, suddenly that insecurity becomes the main event. That is why I do not think this relationship needs one villain. Their coping styles may simply be bringing out the worst reaction in each other. Marissa is saying, give me space so I can calm down. Edward is saying, give me reassurance so I can calm down. And each person is asking for the exact thing the other person struggles to provide. Edward pushes. Marissa shuts down. Marissa shuts down. Edward feels rejected. Edward pushes harder. Marissa gets sharper. Then Edward gets even more insecure. At some point, the original topic stops mattering. Today it is cheating. Tomorrow it could be family. Then money. Then friends. Then another ex. Then the wedding. The subject can change every week while the argument underneath stays exactly the same. That is why I think their physical chemistry needs to be examined more seriously. Because chemistry can sometimes help a couple survive hard moments. But chemistry can also hide incompatibility. Marissa and Edward clearly enjoy each other physically. Edward lights up when she compliments him. They flirt. They have affection. Marissa has also talked positively about how Edward's personality can help her relax. And I believe that connection can be real while the compatibility problem is also real. Those two things can exist at the same time. Someone can be amazing for you on vacation and exhausting inside your daily routine. That does not mean anybody was pretending. It means daily life reveals things attraction cannot. Think about Edward. The relaxed personality Marissa may have found refreshing could feel completely different once they are sharing responsibilities, managing a household, dealing with kids, and making permanent decisions. Now think about Marissa. Her confidence, ambition, organization, and strong personality may have been incredibly attractive to Edward when they were dating. But once he is living inside her established life, those same qualities can begin feeling like constant correction. That is where fantasy collides with compatibility. The real test is not, do you still find this person attractive? The test is, do you respect the way this person moves through everyday life? And that is exactly where viewers seem divided. Some fans feel Marissa is the bigger problem. They look at the corrections, the household expectations, the way she sometimes talks to Edward, and the questions about whether he fits with her friends and her environment. To those viewers, Edward does not look like a partner being welcomed into a new shared life. He looks like somebody constantly trying to qualify for a role in Marissa's existing life. That audience sees the napkin moment and thinks, here we go again. Another test. But another section of the audience is watching Edward and saying, she told you she needed one night. Why can you not stop? Those viewers understand that Edward may be insecure. They may even agree that his concerns about a former intimate connection deserve a real conversation. But they do not think Marissa should have to regulate his anxiety every time it appears. And then there is a third interpretation, and I think this one may be the most important. Maybe neither one of them is completely wrong. Maybe these two people are simply mismatched in some very important emotional areas. That possibility is more serious than deciding who won the argument. Because if Edward were clearly terrible and Marissa were clearly right, the solution would be easy. If Marissa were clearly terrible and Edward were clearly right, same thing. But what happens when two decent people genuinely love each other while their natural reactions consistently make the other person feel worse? Edward may reasonably need reassurance. Marissa may simply not be someone who can provide reassurance on demand without eventually feeling suffocated. Marissa may reasonably need emotional space. Edward may simply not be someone who can give that space without feeling like the relationship is slipping away. Nobody has to be evil for that combination to become exhausting. And the trust conversation proves it. Edward says he trusts Marissa, but he does not trust the other person. I understand the emotional logic. If your partner remains close to somebody they previously had an intimate relationship with, plenty of people would feel uncomfortable. That does not automatically make Edward controlling. But logically, there is still a problem. The outside person cannot betray Edward's relationship alone. Marissa would have to participate. So if Edward truly trusts Marissa's boundaries, then another man's intentions should not have complete control over Edward's peace. Which makes me think, I do not trust him, may actually mean something closer to, I trust you, but I am still afraid I could lose you. And that fear probably did not begin with this other man. It may be connected to Marissa's cold feet, her hesitation, the social differences, the feeling that Edward is constantly being evaluated, the uncertainty about whether she truly sees him as her permanent partner. When you already feel like somebody has one emotional foot near the exit, every outside threat looks bigger. But Marissa deserves the same level of fairness. Her hesitation about marriage is not automatically proof that she does not love Edward. She has already been married. She has children. She has talked publicly about how strongly she wanted to avoid going through another divorce. That history matters. It would be easy to say, if she really loved him, she would stop questioning everything and marry him. Real relationships are not that simple. You can love someone and still be terrified of repeating a painful mistake. You can feel chemistry and still worry about compatibility. You can enjoy somebody's personality and still question whether that personality works inside your household every day. And when children are involved, marriage is not only about what feels romantic in the moment. So I understand why Marissa is evaluating this carefully. The problem is that if Edward constantly feels evaluated, her caution may actually create more of the behavior she is worried about. Imagine feeling like every week brings another test. Do my friends approve of you? Can you fit in with my family? Can you behave correctly at dinner? Can you adapt to my household? Can you handle my lifestyle? Can you make me feel confident enough to marry again? Even a secure person can start feeling insecure if they constantly feel like they are being graded. And then what happens? Edward becomes more anxious. He asks for more reassurance. Marissa experiences that as emotional pressure. She pulls away. Edward sees the distance and thinks, there it is. She is unsure about me again. So he pushes even harder. They may literally be creating the traits in each other that they dislike the most. Marissa is afraid marriage with Edward could become emotionally exhausting. Her hesitation increases Edward's insecurity. Edward becomes more emotionally demanding. Now Marissa sees evidence that marriage could indeed become exhausting. Edward is afraid Marissa does not fully choose him. He asks for reassurance. She feels overwhelmed and withdraws. Now he sees evidence that she may not fully choose him. That is the trap. And until they recognize the trap, they will keep blaming the subject of each argument instead of the cycle underneath it. I also think this is where the social and class differences matter more than any supposed financial scandal. I would not turn this into a money story without evidence. The more interesting issue is status. Marissa understands the environment. Edward is entering it.
She knows her family.
Her friends, her household, her expectations, her social rules. Edward is trying to find his place inside. All of that. So when Marissa corrects him, the correction can feel heavier than the actual behavior. A napkin is suddenly not just a napkin. It can sound like, this is how people in my world behave. And that is why we also have to be careful about calling this simply an American cultural difference. There is no single American dinner table. No single American household. No single standard that represents everybody. Some of what Marissa expects may be far more connected to her specific family, class, and social environment than to American culture as a whole. The real question is whether she is helping Edward adjust or expecting him to perform her version of what an acceptable partner should look like. Because if Edward constantly feels like he has to prove he is sophisticated enough for Marissa's world, resentment will eventually build. And if Marissa constantly feels she has to teach Edward how to function inside that world, resentment will build on her side too. That is why I think respect could become a much bigger issue than jealousy. Jealousy can sometimes be negotiated. You establish boundaries around exes. You decide what communication is appropriate. You agree on what both people need to feel comfortable. But respect is harder. Once Marissa starts seeing Edward as somebody she has to manage, and Edward starts seeing Marissa's independence as evidence she might leave him, every disagreement gets filtered through that belief. Then, you are not arguing about behavior anymore. You are arguing about who you believe your partner fundamentally is. And that is what I would watch next. Does Marissa genuinely respect Edward as an equal adult partner, even when he does things differently than she would? And can Edward accept Marissa's independence without needing constant proof that she is still choosing him? If either answer is no, the wedding will not fix it. The 90-day deadline may actually be making all of this worse. Every disagreement becomes evidence. A bad dinner is no longer just a bad dinner. It becomes, is this what marriage with you will feel like? One jealous conversation becomes, will I have to reassure you forever? One correction becomes, do you even respect me? One request for space becomes, are you pulling away again? That is enormous pressure. They're trying to make a permanent decision while still figuring out whether the daily version of this relationship actually works. And that is why my prediction is that their next major argument will not really be about cheating either. It will probably be another version of the same power struggle. Who decides when an emotional conversation happens? Edward appears to want resolution when the anxiety arrives. Marissa wants to decide when she has enough emotional energy to participate. Until they create a middle ground, every new issue can become the same old fight. I also think the teacher-student dynamic is more dangerous long-term than Edward's jealousy. Edward may accept being corrected right now because he is trying to show Marissa he can fit into her life. But resentment can build quietly. Nobody wants to feel like their spouse is permanently grading them. And on Marissa's side, she may tolerate repeated reassurance seeking while she is still trying to save the relationship. But nobody wants every peaceful moment to feel like it could suddenly become another emergency meeting about the state of the marriage. Eventually, one of them could stop seeing these behaviors as temporary problems and start seeing them as personality. That is the moment relationships become much harder to repair. People stop saying, we need to communicate better. They start saying, this is just who you are.